Are these recent fantasy reads worth your money with just a yes, no, maybe? Now, this is a personal finance channel and not a book talk channel, but books is one of the areas where I have always overspent. Whether it's on Kindle, Audible, or the physical books, I always tend to splurge when it comes to buying books. So I always make sure to leave a little bit of a line item for pleasure spending, which often ends up getting depleted on the books that I buy. And sometimes I just wish I hadn't spent the money on a certain book that I read. I would have preferred to have spent that money on some other book. But what makes a book, especially in the fantasy genre, which can be so subjective, worth the money or not? So to me personally, a book is worth the money if it is both entertaining and it is important. And to me, a book is important if it does one of three things. So the first is, does it teach me to do something that I find valuable? The second is, does it change my view or opinion on something, whether it's socially, economically, politically, historically, what have you? And third, does it change the way I move through or exist in the world? Lots of fantasy books are amazing and wonderful, and they keep me thinking about them for days or weeks or months or years later, but they don't really do one of those three things. So while they are highly entertaining, they aren't really important, at least in the way that I define it, and so might be better off rented or borrowed from a friend as opposed to spending the money to have them in your library. But of course, that little aspect of whether or not you're going to spend money on something that is purely entertaining is personal to everyone and everyone's budget. So without further ado, I'm going to get right into, are these fantasy books worth the money? Yes, no, or maybe. So first we have Babel or Babel. I'm not really sure how you would pronounce this one, and I would say that this is a yes. It is both entertaining, but it is also extremely important. It is a critique on imperialism. I was pretty devastated by the end of this book. It takes place at Oxford University in the 1800s, and it does have a super interesting magic system, although I will say that this book is a little bit light on the fantasy and pretty heavy on the academia. It also isn't in a whole other world necessarily. This magic system is quite subtle. There's also a lot of linguistics at play in this book, so if you were into learning languages, you're really going to like this one. This really drove home some of the ways in which our systems, particularly our education systems, uphold some of the inequities in the world. And as someone who loves education, who loves being a teacher, being a student, I thought this was really important. It really made me think about our academic institutions and what exactly they're trying to do in the world. This made me think hard about some truths about education that I held very near and dear to my heart. And so, yeah, I would give this a big yes. It is both entertaining and it's important. Now, the next book is Fourth Wing. I actually don't have a physical copy of this book, but I have it both on Kindle and on Audible. I absolutely love this book. And its second book in this series, which is Iron Flame. I think it is highly, highly entertaining, but I would give this a maybe. It is not important, I don't think. It didn't make me rethink any truths. It didn't change my opinion on anything. Didn't really teach me anything, but I was so wildly entertained from like cover to cover that if you have the budget to spend on this kind of entertainment, just pure fun, then maybe go for it. But is it something that is going to change your world in any sort of fundamental way? I'm gonna say no, but I am still waiting on my special editions to come in. It is a maybe, and it's a definite no despite its high entertainment value if you're only into high fantasy or you're not into fantasy at all. Next, we've got Divine Rivals. Now, this is very popular on social media, on Book Talk. It is super cute. I'm gonna give this a no. It is YA, it is a lot of fun. It is short, sweet, super easy to get through. I don't think I wanted to spend, like in retrospect, I think this was more expensive because I got it in the hardcover act. So I would say it was around £13 or something like that. I'm gonna say no. I wish I had just rented this out, borrowed it from a friend, bought it used when it came out in paperback. I live in Poland, so we only really have very few English language bookstores, but we do have a used bookstore. I could have just waited and read it on that. So yeah, definitely check it out on Libby if you live in the United States. Go to your local library, come borrow it from me. It is fun, it is sweet, but it's nothing super special, important. It didn't really stay with me afterwards in terms of thinking about even the storyline. So even though it was a form of escapism at the time, it's not so great that you keep thinking about it. At least it wasn't for me. So that's a no. Okie dokie. Next we have got by Sarah J. Maas, the House of Earth and Blood, as well as like the 2 books that come after, so House of Sky and Breath and House of Flame and Shadow. This is part of the Crescent City series. I have read Sarah J. Maas books before. She's incredibly popular on social media, on Book Talk. I bought all 3 books at once. I really enjoyed some of her other series, particularly Throne of Glass, but unfortunately I would have to give this a no. First of all, I don't really love urban fantasy, but that's not the point. Even if you do love urban fantasy, I think it was attempting to be important. I think it was attempting on making some sort of commentary on imperialism and or capitalism, but I don't think it really hit home for me, and the characters were not particularly likable, especially the main characters. The world was really complex, but it's unsure as to why, since like I said, it didn't really drive home the sort of meaning and points that I thought it might be attempting to do. I wish I had not read it at all. I definitely wish I hadn't spent money on all 3 of the books. I would have just rented it out. I did finish it. It was like mildly entertaining, but I would just say no, it wasn't worth the money. Rent it out, borrow it from a friend, or don't read it at all. It doesn't really change your world in any way. Even in terms of entertainment value, it really doesn't stick with you. So yeah, that's a no. So next we've got, The Will of the Many. This, I think, recently came out. I definitely recently got it. I finished it really, really quickly. I would say yes, this is both entertaining, well written, and important. This, I believe, is a critique on capitalism. It takes place in a magical world that seems to be ancient Greece related or adjacent. It is beautifully written. It is extremely engaging. I was a little slow to like fully understand the commentary that was being made, but it really did hit for me at the end, where I was like, oh. And as someone who has a personal finance channel, obviously, and having been born and raised in the United States, I tend to be a proponent of capitalism, not extreme or true capitalism, and I live in Europe, so obviously I choose to live in a place that is a little more socialist in some ways, but I think I had always kind of been more of a capitalist at heart. I definitely believe in that. And this book really made me question the foundations of the system. So in the United States, you hear this a lot in election season that's coming up. You know, you say the word communism like it's a bad word. But when you think about the fundamental root of communism, it's a bit of a utopia where everybody gets an even share, nobody is hungry, all that stuff. Like at its root, communism is not inherently bad. It's sort of the execution of it and the people who execute it, which tend to be humans that are flawed, which kind of broke that system. This really made you think of what are the foundations of our system. It makes you think about what is the foundational root of capitalism, and is that good or bad at its root? In other words, is it not just humans that are flawed? Is it the system itself? I don't know. Now you might say, why not just read Chomsky's Profit Over People as opposed to reading this book, which you can, but some people prefer their important messages delivered in an entertaining way. I think this was both entertaining and important. I did buy it in a hardcover, which was about $30, which is a lot to spend on a book. However, I am glad I did. I am glad it is hardcover. It is a beautiful book, and I found it important, and it found that it made me think. I don't know that it changed my mind, but it did really make me consider the systems under which I was raised and sort of trained in, and what that means about who we are. It's a yes. The next book or series is the Caraval series. This is also very popular on social media, on Book Talk, etc. I have it on Audible, and I really wish I didn't. The first book was okay. I would have still said no, and then I just couldn't get through the rest of them. Some people might find it entertaining. I found it challenging to get through. It is young adult. To me, it was neither entertaining nor important. It didn't make me think about things in a different way. It just didn't hit the mark for me. I would just say no. I almost would say I wish I didn't read it. I don't know. It didn't do anything for me in any direction. And the final is also extremely popular, and it's really weird because the author of Caraval is actually the author of this series, which is the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. I have 2, but I have read the 3rd as well. It's just they were selling it only in hardcover, and I don't like mixy-matchy. This series is so much fun. I loved it so much. I would still say it is a maybe just for the entertainment value. I don't think it is really important in any way. It didn't really teach me anything. It didn't really change the way I viewed anything or how I moved through the world. It did. I think there are some ways to interpret it as like a championing of dreamers and championing the idea of infinite endings, but I think that was more of a affirmation of like the way that I am already, as opposed to changing anything or questioning anything. And I also think it's more of my adoration for idealism and optimism and naivety, which this book is full of. It's a fairy tale. It's really, really sweet. It is YA, highly entertaining. Maybe if you have the budget for it and are into fairy tales and like that sort of whimsy. I don't necessarily know that it was important in the way that I define it. I'm really glad I have it and that I budgeted for it. But if it's not in the budget, I wouldn't really go out of your way to do it. I would just rent it or borrow it, but it is a really good time. And I'm going to do a nonfiction version of this. Are these books worth your money? Yes, no, maybe next time.